For many, a sharp divide exists between the beliefs held on Sunday and the functional reality of Monday morning. One world deals in static eschatological rules. The other requires navigating the complex mechanics of work, family, and decision-making. This friction is often dismissed as a personal crisis of faith. Viewed systemically, however, the problem lies in the underlying theological framework, a set of operating assumptions that has remained largely unchanged since the early Middle Ages. The structural divergence began in the 5th century, with a specific translation choice in Romans 5:12. The original Greek phrase "epho" describes a causal observation: death spread to all because all sinned. In the Latin Vulgate, this became "in quo," meaning in whom all sinned. This shifted the focus from an action to a permanent condition. Relying on the Latin text, Augustine developed a theology where failing was no longer a functional misstep, but an inherited debt. Human nature became defined by this baseline of guilt rather than the capacity for choice. This single prepositional shift reframed human error as an inescapable curse. It moved the primary motivation of faith toward the management of inherent guilt, creating a system governed by the fear of punishment. A second linguistic bottleneck occurred with the translation of the Greek word metanoia. In its original context, metanoia describes a cognitive shift, a movement to a higher level of understanding, or a structural change in how one perceives reality. When Jerome translated this into the Latin penitentia, the meaning narrowed significantly. The concept of spiritual evolution was replaced by a cycle of emotional regret. Growth was sidelined in favor of penance. Together, inherited guilt and the requirement of constant emotional regret became the primary drivers of Western spiritual life, focusing the human experience on the remediation of shame. Moving past the modern crisis of faith requires looking through these linguistic layers to find a framework that aligns with the structural realities we understand today. The reconstruction begins with the Hebrew concept of nishmat hayim, the direct divine breath. This mirrors the mathematical principle of self-similarity, where the blueprint of a complex whole is contained within its smallest individual parts. We find the physical expression of this principle in the biological function of DNA. Every cell houses the complete architectural data for the organism. Viewed through this lens, the divine nature is fractally encoded within human nature. We carry the structural signature of the Creator in our biological core. Because this fractal is a permanent feature of our architecture, human dignity is an inherent fact of our design. This structural reality stands in direct opposition to theories of total human depravity. The second law of thermodynamics describes the universal tendency for order to collapse into disorder. This is entropy. Biological life only persists by actively consuming energy to reduce local entropy, pushing back against this natural decay to maintain structure. The theological equivalent of this metabolic work is what we term white pain. White pain represents the energy-intensive choice to resist moral and relational decay.
It is the friction felt when choosing integrity over convenience or empathy over ego. Yielding to the natural entropic flow of the ego results in dark pain, the chaotic disorder that follows when the effort to maintain moral structure stops. Salvation functions as the active, ongoing physics of generating local moral entropy reduction right now, in the present moment. This necessity for active choice reframes the tree of knowledge from a historical trap into a functional requirement for free will. This mechanism is visible in the evolution of the human brain. The amygdala acts as an ancient alarm system designed to prioritize immediate survival through instinctive fear. The biblical narrative of temptation aligns with the neurology of an amygdala hijacking, where reflexive impulses override rational thought. We intervene in this process using a 5-second diagnostic. This pause allows the brain to intercept the survival signal and reroute it to the prefrontal cortex. This 5-second window creates the space for the prefrontal cortex to evaluate the situation and choose growth over the preservation of the ego. Overcoming temptation is a measurable neurological discipline. It is the act of providing the prefrontal cortex the time required to choose white pain. It is important to define a clear boundary. Thermodynamics and neuroscience do not mathematically prove the existence of God. These scientific alignments function as structural metaphors. They provide a way to understand ancient texts through the frameworks we use to understand the physical world. Classical theological dogmas were themselves era-specific responses to civilizational crises, using the language and logic available at the time. Augustine's doctrine of original sin provided a structural answer to the trauma of a collapsing Roman Empire, explaining a world that felt broken and cursed. In the 11th century, Anselm's satisfaction theory adapted the mechanics of the atonement to fit the feudal honor codes of his society. John Wesley's Methodism offered a spiritual counterweight to the social fragmentation and brutal labor conditions of the Industrial Revolution. In the 20th century, Dietrich Bonhoeffer articulated costly grace as the moral architecture required to resist the rise of totalitarianism. Each of these shifts proves that theology must evolve its language to remain relevant to the crises of the current age. Today, we face a new set of structural challenges: the rise of artificial intelligence, the vastness of modern cosmology, and widespread psychological fragmentation. Meeting these challenges requires a model that integrates DNA self-similarity, entropy reduction, and prefrontal neurorouting into a single stable system. This framework replaces a focus on inherited debt with the concept of sola amore, or only love. Love is understood here as a state of structural alignment. It is the thermodynamic and neurological decision to maintain order and connection against the natural pull of decay. Integrating physics and neuroscience with theology does not diminish the ancient texts. Instead, it reveals the functional mechanics that have always been there, waiting for a language that could describe them.